The emergency transmission tore through the void of space like the dying scream of a civilization. In the sterile corridors of the Galactic Aid Coordination Center, Colony Administrator Carol felt her four hearts skip as the desperate message reached her console. Her mandibles clicked nervously, a sound that would have terrified humans. But right now, she was the one trembling with fear. Emergency, ... emergency. This is New Harvest Colony, ... The voice crackled through static, weak, and breaking. Massive plague outbreak spreading faster than wildfire, ... Children dying by the thousands, ... Our medical supplies are completely exhausted. Please, anyone who can hear this transmission, we're begging you. Carell's compound eyes widened as the full horror of the situation crystallized before her. 12 million souls. 12 million beings trapped on a quarantined world, watching helplessly as their loved ones withered away while the galaxy's finest bureaucrats sat in comfortable chambers, debating response protocols like it was some academic exercise. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, part of that same system. Shuffling digital papers while people died, the data streaming across her screen painted a nightmare that would haunt her dreams for cycles to come. Children as young as 3 solar years were succumbing to a plague that seemed almost designed to cause maximum suffering. Hospitals overflowing with the sick and dying. Medical staff collapsing at their posts from exhaustion and infection. Food distribution centers abandoned as fear paralyzed the population. You know what's truly terrifying about bureaucracy? It moves at the speed of committee meetings, while disasters move at the speed of death. Carol-esque trembling appendages reached for the standard response protocols. According to Galactic Emergency Regulation 47B, a medical crisis of this magnitude warranted the dispatch of exactly one medical frigate, carrying basic supplies and a skeleton crew of doctors. It was efficient, cost-effective, and completely inadequate. But rules were rules, and Carell had followed rules her entire career. Her finger hovered over the dispatch button when her console suddenly erupted in a blaze of priority signals that made her jump backward. The emergency klaxons began wailing as an incoming transmission overrode every system in the coordination center. This wasn't just any signal, this was the kind of communication that made seasoned Galactic administrators break out in cold sweats. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Human Emergency Response Fleet. A voice growled through the speakers like distant thunder before a storm. The transmission carried an authority that seemed to bypass Carell's rational mind and speak directly to something primal in her nervous system. We've intercepted your distress call from New Harvest Colony. Cancel your aid ship immediately. We're taking over this operation. Carell's four hearts began hammering against her chest cavity like trapped birds. Humans. Of course it had to be humans. The galaxy's most notorious Deathworlders. The species that had turned their entire evolutionary nightmare into a cosmic advantage. The beings who looked at impossible odds and responded by making them personal. Admiral Morrison Carell managed to stammer, her translator struggling to convert her species' panic clicks into galactic standard. Sir, with all due respect, this is a standard medical emergency situation. Protocol dictates that one hospital ship should be more than sufficient to. Lady, a single word cut through her explanation like a plasma blade through tissue. Admiral Morrison's voice carried the kind of quiet intensity that suggested he'd seen too much death and decided to declare war on it personally. When humans hear that children are dying anywhere in this galaxy, we don't send one ship. We don't send adequate supplies. We don't follow protocols written by committee members who've never watched a kid take their last breath. Carell felt something cold crawl up her spine as Morrison continued, his words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. We send everything we have. Every ship, every doctor, every piece of equipment we can get our hands on. Because here's what your protocols don't understand when it comes to saving lives. There's no such thing as overkill. The transmission crackled with static, but Morrison's next words came through crystal clear, carrying a promise that would reshape how the galaxy thought about emergency response forever. Morrison out. The communication channel died with the finality of a coffin lid closing, leaving Carell staring at her screen in absolute terror. The silence in the coordination center was deafening, broken only by the nervous clicking of her mandibles and the distant hum of life support systems. Her fellow administrators had gathered around her workstation, their various appendages and sensory organs all focused on her with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. What had she just unleashed upon the galaxy? What happens when you take a species that evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill them, give them faster than light travel, and then tell them that innocent people are suffering somewhere in the vast darkness of space? Carell was about to find out, and something told her that New Harvest Colony would never be the same again. 2 hours and 17 minutes after Admiral Morrison's transmission ended, the fabric of space-time above New Harvest Colony ripped open like someone had torn a hole in reality itself. What emerged from that swirling vortex of hyperspace would forever change how the galaxy understood the difference between a response and a reckoning. 47. Human warships materialized from the void like avenging angels descending from the heavens, their massive hulls bristling with enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust. But here's the thing about humans that the galaxy never quite grasped. They didn't just build weapons to destroy. They built them to protect. And today, protection meant unleashing hell on a microscopic enemy. The lead dreadnought USS Determination stretched nearly 2 miles from bow to stern, its armored hull scarred from 100 battles across the outer rim. Behind it came the carrier's floating cities capable of housing entire populations. Then the destroyers sleek and deadly as hunting wolves. And finally, the hospital ships, gleaming white vessels that looked more like floating cathedrals than military hardware. Colony Governor Beth Reynolds stood frozen on her command deck, watching the impossible sight unfold through the reinforced viewports of her dying world's orbital station. Tears streamed down her weathered face, stares of disbelief, of hope, of pure emotional overload. For 3 weeks, she'd watched her people die while sending increasingly desperate pleas to a galactic bureaucracy that seemed more interested in filing paperwork than saving lives. You know what the truly heartbreaking part was? Believing anyone was actually listening. Her colony's population had dropped from 12 million to just over 9 million in 21 days. Children were dying faster than the crematoriums could process bodies. Hospitals had become morgues. The quarantine barriers meant no one could leave, and apparently, no one could enter either. She'd resigned herself to watching her entire civilization collapse into ash and memory. But humans had a different definition of impossible. The communication array crackled to life with such intensity that Beth's chief communications officer actually stumbled backward from his console. When Admiral Morrison's voice filled the command center, it carried the kind of authority that seemed to make the very air vibrate with purpose. Governor Reynolds, this is Admiral Jake Morrison. Of the Human Emergency Response Fleet, the deep voice announced, each word precisely measured and absolutely final. We're establishing orbital command effective immediately. Prepare your people for immediate planetary assault operations. Assault? She gasped, images of orbital bombardment flashing through her mind, that she called. For help only to watch her world get reduced to molten slag? The pause that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 lifetimes. When Morrison spoke again, his voice carried something that Beth hadn't heard in weeks, something that made her knees go weak with relief. We're declaring war on this plague, Morrison said, and Beth could hear the steel resolve in every syllable. No human child dies on our watch ever, and right now every child on your world is under human protection. The implications of those words hit Beth like a physical blow. The humans weren't just responding to a medical emergency, they were taking it personally. They'd turned a planetary crisis into a blood oath, and everyone in the galaxy knew what happened when humans made promises involving the safety of children. Sir, Beth managed to whisper, her voice breaking with emotion, we have casualties numbering in the millions. Our medical infrastructure has completely collapsed. We don't even have enough power to govern her, Morrison interrupted, and she could hear the smile in his voice, the kind of smile that preceded miracles. You're thinking like the problem is bigger than the solution. It's about to change. Above New Harvest Colony, The sky suddenly turned white-hot as hundreds of atmospheric entry vehicles screamed downward through the atmosphere like meteors carrying salvation. The sonic booms rattled windows across the planet's surface, but for the first time in weeks, people weren't hiding from the sound. They were running toward it. These weren't weapons dropping from the heavens. These were something far more terrifying to the plague ravaging the colony. They were the physical manifestation of human determination, wrapped in ceramosteel and powered by fusion reactors. Hope, raw, uncompromising. Overwhelming hope delivered at hypersonic velocities. Beth watched through her telescopic displays as the first wave of human emergency response teams hit the ground running, literally running. Medical stations began materializing faster than her sensors could track them. Mobile hospitals unfolded like mechanical flowers blooming in fast forward. Atmospheric processors hummed to life, beginning the process of scrubbing the very air clean of pathogens. "My God," whispered her science officer, monitoring the deployment through increasingly amazed calculations. "Governor, they're establishing treatment capacity for 15 million people. Our population is only 9 million. Beth felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Laughter. It bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest, carrying 3 weeks of suppressed hysteria and desperate hope. They're not just planning to save everyone, she realized. They're planning for the people we've already lost to somehow come back. That's when she understood the fundamental difference between how humans approach problems and how everyone else in the galaxy did it. Other species calculated minimum effective responses. Humans calculated maximum possible outcomes and then built solutions big enough to handle them. The cum channel crackled again. This time Morrison's voice carried the tone of someone who'd just watched his people turn impossible into inevitable. "Governor Reynolds, you might want to tell your people to brace themselves. We're about to show this plague what happens when you mess with human kids." Beth looked out at the armada hanging in space above her world like a steel constellation of defiance. And she knew that in a few hours, New Harvest Colony would become something the galaxy had never seen before. Monument to what humans could accomplish when they decided that good enough wasn't actually good enough. But first, they had a war to win. The human response was like watching gods remake reality in real time. Except these gods wore military uniforms and had absolutely zero patience for the impossible. Within 18 hours of Admiral Morrison's declaration of war against the plague, New Harvest Colony had been transformed into something that defied every law of logistics, physics, and common sense that the galaxy had established over millennia. Massive medical stations materialized across the planet's surface overnight, each one larger than the colony's original capital city and infinitely more advanced than anything the local population had ever imagined. Governor Beth Reynolds stood at her observation deck, watching the impossible unfold through tear-blurred eyes. She'd lived on New Harvest for 37 years, had watched it grow from a struggling agricultural outpost to a thriving world of 12 million souls. But in less than a day, the humans had built more infrastructure than her people had managed. In 4 decades, you know what's absolutely terrifying about human engineering? They don't just solve the problem in front of them, they solve every problem that might ever exist in the same zip code. Admiral Jake Morrison strode through the controlled chaos of the primary command center like a force of nature wearing combat boots. His weathered face, carved from granite and seasoned by battles across a dozen star systems, showed no trace of satisfaction despite the miraculous progress surrounding him. To Morrison, miracles were just Tuesday's workload. And Tuesday wasn't over yet. The command center itself was a marvel of human military efficiency. Crystalline dome spanning 3 city blocks, filled with holographic displays that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every medical intervention happening across the entire planet. Hundreds of human personnel moved through the space with the precision of a symphony orchestra, each one focused on their particular note in a composition. Designed to save lives? Status report, Morrison barked, his voice cutting through the organized chaos like a blade through silk. The authority in that command made hardened military veterans straighten their spines from 50 feet away. Colonel Maria Santos, his chief medical officer, approached with data streaming across her tablet faster than most species could process visual information. Santos had earned her reputation in the Titan medical crisis where she'd kept 2 million colonists alive during a 3-month siege. Today, she was operating on a scale that made Titan look like a practice drill. Sir, we've deployed 40 field hospitals, 16 fully equipped research laboratories, and 2 orbital treatment centers capable of handling critical cases, Santos reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. Current statistics show the death rate has dropped 80% in the last 6 hours. Most commanders would have smiled at those numbers. Most species would have declared victory and started planning celebration parades. Morrison's eyes blazed. With the kind of intensity that suggested 80% wasn't a victory, was just the beginning. Not good enough, Colonel? Morrison said, his words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. I want 0 casualties. These people sent out a distress call. They trusted us to respond, and by God, we're going to save every last one of them. Every child, every adult, every elderly citizen who's fighting this thing. 0 means 0. Santos nodded without hesitation. In the human military, impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet, and Morrison had built his career on proving that distinction meaningless. The command center's atmosphere shifted subtly as Dr. Robert Hayes, the mission's lead scientist, approached with the kind of urgent stride that suggested he'd discovered something that was about to change everything. Hayes had spent the last 15 years studying xenobiological threats across the Outer Rim, but the expression on his face suggested this was unlike anything in his extensive experience. Admiral Hayes said, his voice tight with controlled anger, we've isolated and analyzed the plague strain. This pathogen isn't natural evolution. It's artificial. Someone deliberately weaponized this disease. The temperature in the command center seemed to drop 10 degrees as Morrison's jaw clenched like a steel trap snapping shut. Around them, the organized chaos of the medical response continued. But anyone close enough to see the Admiral's face suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Explain, Morrison said. And that single word carried enough menace to make seasoned combat veterans nervous. Hayes activated a holographic display that showed the plague's genetic structure in terrifying detail. The pathogen has been engineered, with specific targeting sequences designed to maximize suffering while avoiding quick death. It's designed to spread rapidly through populations, cause maximum medical resource depletion, and create social collapse. This isn't a plague, Admiral, it's a weapon of mass destruction disguised as a medical emergency. The implications hit the command center like a shockwave. Someone had deliberately turned New Harvest Colony into a testing ground for biological warfare, using 12 million innocent people as test subjects. Someone had looked at children playing in schoolyards and decided they were acceptable casualties in whatever twisted game we're playing. Morrison was quiet for exactly 7 seconds, long enough for everyone in the command center to realize. They were witnessing the birth of something that would reshape galactic politics forever. Colonel Santos, Morrison said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded hurricanes. Double our medical deployment. I want redundant treatment capacity for every citizen on this planet. Dr. Hayes, want a complete genetic analysis of this weapon and projections for where else it might have been deployed. Hayes nodded grimly. Already running the analysis? Sir, if this pathogen exists here, there's a 93% probability it's been used elsewhere. Morrison's expression shifted into something that would have made apex predators rethink their career choices. Then we're not just treating the sick anymore. We're hunting whoever did this, and we're making sure they never get the chance to turn children into weapons testing again. The Admiral activated his personal communication array, connecting him directly to human command across the galaxy. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to turn righteous anger into unstoppable force. This is Admiral Morrison. Deploy the investigation teams. Someone just made this personal. Humans hadn't just come to heal, they'd come to ensure this horror never happened again. And when humans made that kind of promise, the universe had a tendency to rearrange itself accordingly. But first, they had some very unpleasant people too. Find the Galactic Emergency Council Chamber erupted into absolute chaos as 237 different species watched their carefully constructed understanding of reality crumble in real time. The massive holographic displays surrounding the circular assembly showed impossible statistics streaming in from New Harvest Colony, each number more mind-bending than the last. Ambassador Tavar of the Nexilian Confederation felt her 8 tentacles writhing in panic as she processed what her sensors were telling her. Her species had evolved perfect mathematical minds over millions of years. It's capable of calculating hyperspace trajectories in their heads, but the numbers from New Harvest Colony simply refused to make sense. They deployed their entire battle fleet for a medical crisis. She shrieked, her translator struggling to convert her species' panic frequency into galactic standard. 47 warships? 47. The humans have completely lost their collective minds. Around the chamber, other representatives were having their own versions of mental breakdowns. The Korthok delegate was clicking his mandibles so rapidly it sounded like a machine gun. The crystalline Zephyrians were flickering through color, spectrums that indicated extreme confusion. Even the normally unflappable Valdorian ambassador was sweating through his environmental suit. You know what's really funny about galactic politics? Everyone spends centuries arguing about the proper protocol for everything. And then humans show up and throw the entire rulebook into a black hole. Chancellor Exmoth, the Council's elderly leader whose species had been mediating galactic disputes for over 2 millennia, stared at the incoming data with the expression of someone watching their entire worldview collapse into cosmic dust. His voice quavered with a mixture of fear and awe as he read the reports aloud. According to these casualty statistics, the death rate on New Harvest Colony has dropped to near 0, he announced, his words echoing through the suddenly silent chamber. They're performing medical miracles across 12 million people simultaneously. These numbers, they're impossible. The main holographic display shifted to show the human medical deployment in stunning detail. Massive treatment facilities that had materialized overnight, orbital medical stations the size of small moons, emergency response teams moving with the precision of a military operation and the compassion of a rescue mission. Look at this deployment analysis, whispered Ambassador Carol. It's the same administrator who had initially received the distress call. Her 4 hearts were beating so rapidly that her medical monitor was flashing warning signals. They've established medical infrastructure that exceeds the total healthcare capacity of the core worlds. For one colony? 1. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't just responded to a medical emergency, they'd redefined what emergency response meant on a galactic scale. They'd taken a crisis that would have taken the Council months to address and solved it in hours. That silence was shattered when the main communication array activated with the distinctive hum of a priority transmission from the human emergency response fleet. Every representative in the chamber felt their various spines, tentacles, and skeletal structures tense as Admiral Morrison's scarred face appeared on the central display. Morrison looked exactly like what he was, a man who had spent decades fighting battles across the galaxy and had recently decided to declare war on suffering itself. His steel-gray eyes carried the kind of authority that made entire star systems reconsider their life choices. And today, those eyes were burning with something that transcended simple anger. "Galactic Council," Morrison said, his voice cutting through the chamber's atmosphere like a plasma blade through tissue. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Human Emergency Response Fleet. I'm transmitting our preliminary findings regarding the New Harvest Colony incident. The data that flooded the Council's systems made several representatives physically recoil from their consoles. Genetic analysis, bioweapon signatures, distribution vectors, evidence of deliberate deployment. We've traced the plague's origin. 2 illegal bioweapons, research conducted in 17 different systems." Morrison continued, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. This was not a natural outbreak. This was a field test of a weapon designed to cause maximum civilian casualties while overwhelming medical response capabilities. Ambassador Tavar felt her tentacles go numb as the horrifying truth crystallized. Someone had deliberately infected 12 million innocent people to test a biological weapon. Someone had turned children into test subjects. Morrison's expression shifted into something that would have made apex predators reconsider their evolutionary choices. Effective immediately, we're dispatching human investigation teams to all 17 suspected systems. These teams will have full authority to conduct comprehensive searches, interrogations, and evidence collection. The chamber erupted again, but this time it wasn't confusion, it was pure terror. The humans weren't requesting permission to investigate. They weren't submitting formal requests through proper diplomatic channels. They were announcing their intentions and daring anyone to try to stop them. Admiral Morrison, Chancellor Exmoth, managed to stammer, with all due respect. You cannot simply dispatch military forces into sovereign systems without Chancellor. Morrison interrupted, and the single word carried enough menace to make the temperature in the chamber seem to drop. With all due respect, someone just turned children into weapons, test subjects. Any resistance to our investigation will be met with extreme prejudice. The communication channel went silent, leaving the council chamber in the kind of quiet that follows natural disasters. Every representative stared at the blank screen where Morrison's face had been, processing the implications of what they'd just witnessed. "They're not asking permission," Ambassador Tavar whispered, her voice barely audible above the chamber's life support systems. "They're not following protocols. They're just ... telling us how it's going to be." The realization hit the assembly like a shockwave. For millennia, galactic governance had operated on consensus, committee decisions, and carefully negotiated compromises. Problems were studied, debated, and gradually addressed through proper channels. The humans had just thrown that entire system into a supernova and replaced it with something far more terrifying. Results. Chancellor Exmoth slumped in his ceremonial chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 800 years. "The age of bureaucratic delays is ending," he said, his voice carrying the weight of historical inevitability. "The age of human solutions has begun." Across the chamber, representatives began frantically contacting their home governments, trying to explain how a single medical emergency had just reshuffled the balance of power in the galaxy. But deep down, they all knew the truth. The humans hadn't just saved New Harvest Colony. It'd shown the galaxy what decisive action looked like, and there was no going back. But first, they had 17 systems to investigate, and something told the Council that those investigations were going to be very uncomfortable for whoever had thought testing weapons on children was acceptable. 6 months after New Harvest Colony, the galaxy had developed a new phrase that made bureaucrats break out in cold sweats and dictators lose sleep, pulling a Morrison. It meant solving any crisis with overwhelming force, absolute determination, and a complete disregard for the word impossible. The linguistic shift was just the beginning. What had started as Admiral Jake Morrison's personal war against a single plague outbreak had evolved into humanity's galactic crusade against suffering itself, a crusade that was reshaping the fundamental. The nature of how civilizations responded to disaster. Morrison stood in his expanded command center aboard the USS Determination, now serving as the mobile headquarters for the Human Emergency Response Fleet. The facility had grown from a simple military bridge into something resembling mission control for the entire galaxy's emergency services. Holographic displays showed 17 simultaneous crisis responses spanning from the core worlds to the unexplored rim territories. Each one a testament to humanity's disturbing tendency to treat adequate response as a starting point rather than a goal. You know what's truly terrifying about humans? Give them 6 months to perfect something, and they'll turn it into an art form that makes the rest of the galaxy question their life choices. The statistics scrolling across Morrison's displays would have been considered science fiction just months earlier. The Human Emergency Response Fleet now consisted of over 300 vessels specifically designed for crisis intervention. It's not just medical emergencies, natural disasters, famine relief, infrastructure collapse, even diplomatic crises that required what humans euphemistically called aggressive peacekeeping. "Admiral," reported Captain Lisa Thompson, approaching with the kind of urgent stride that indicated someone, somewhere, was having the worst day of their lives. Thompson had earned her position during the Kepler Station incident, where she'd coordinated the evacuation of 2 million civilians while the station was actively exploding around them. Today's crisis was apparently just another Tuesday, receiving a priority distress call from the Outer Rim territories. Thompson continued, her tablet streaming data faster than most species could process. Asteroid impact on agricultural. World Harmony 7. Estimated 500 immediate casualties. It's potential for thousands more if infrastructure collapse continues. Morrison's weathered face, already carved from granite and seasoned by battles across a dozen star systems, hardened into something that suggested this particular asteroid had just made a very personal enemy. The Admiral had developed an almost supernatural ability to take natural disasters personally, as if the universe itself was deliberately testing his patience. Current emergency protocols suggest deploying 20 vessels for this scale of disaster, Thompson reported, consulting her tactical analysis. Full disaster response package, including medical facilities, infrastructure repair teams, and temporary housing for displaced populations. Morrison was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough for every officer in the command center to realize they were about to witness another redefinition of what adequate response meant in the human vocabulary. Make it 30 ships. Morrison decided, his voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that made space-time itself seem to bend around his words. And deploy the new rapid response stations. If we're going to save lives, we're going to save them right the first time. The transformation that followed was like watching controlled chaos become a symphony of logistics. Morrison's orders rippled through the human emergency response fleet with the precision of a military operation and the urgency of a rescue mission. 30 vessels, including hospital ships the size of cities, construction platforms that could rebuild entire continents, and support craft carrying everything from emergency food supplies to complete atmospheric processors around the galaxy. Other species watched this deployment with the same mixture of awe and terror that ancient humans might have felt, watching volcanoes reshape landscapes. The humans had turned their legendary capacity for warfare into something far more dangerous than any weapon ever devised. An unstoppable force for good that accepted no compromise and tolerated no delay. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "the Galactic Council is requesting updated casualty projections for Harmony 7. Morrison's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement if it hadn't been so intimidating. "Tell them we're projecting 0 long-term casualties and complete infrastructure replacement within 72 hours. The communications officer paused, stylus hovering over his tablet. "Sir, they're asking how we can guarantee 0 casualties for a natural disaster of this magnitude." Because Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of 6 months of redefining impossible, "We don't plan for acceptable losses. We plan for unacceptable victories." 3,000 light-years away, on New Harvest Colony, Governor Beth Reynolds stood on the observation deck of her newly constructed capital city, a gleaming metropolis that made her old colonial settlement look like a camping trip. The humans hadn't just saved her world. They'd transformed it into something that served as a permanent reminder of what decisive action could accomplish. Beth was filing her monthly report to the Galactic Council, a document that had become required. Reading for crisis management specialists across known space, her conclusion hadn't changed in 6 months. But it had become increasingly relevant, as more worlds discovered what happened when humans decided to help. "Warning to all galactic governments," she wrote, smiling as she watched human construction teams putting finishing touches on the planet's 5th major medical center. "Never ask humans for small help. They respond to suffering like a natural disaster. Swift, overwhelming, and absolutely unstoppable. The only difference is that when humans are finished, everything is better than it was before the crisis started." The galaxy had learned its lesson. Though the lesson was still reshaping how civilizations thought about everything from emergency response to the fundamental nature of what was possible when someone decided that good enough wasn't actually good enough. When people needed saving anywhere in the galaxy, they called the humans. And the humans always answered with everything they had, plus everything they could build, borrow, or invent in the time it took to get there. Morrison looked out at the stars through his command center's viewports, watching 30 ships alter course toward Harmony 7 with the precision of a ballet and the power of a battle fleet. 6 months ago, he'd responded to one distress call. Today, humanity was responding to suffering itself, one overwhelming victory at a time. The age of proportional response was over. The age of human-scale solutions was just getting started. The end.